Welcome to another talk on reflections on passages in Savitri. The title of this presentation is "A Whole Mysterious World is Locked Within." Sri Aurobindo's epic poem Savitri depicts a symbolic story from the Mahabharata concerning the princess Savitri's conquest of immortality, annulling the death of her newlywed husband, Satyavan. But Sri Aurobindo uses the story as a framework to tell a much vaster story of his vision and understanding of the nature of reality and consciousness and the spiritual destiny of humanity. It is replete with profound spiritual teachings concerning the origins of the physical universe and the evolution of life and consciousness, leading up to humanity and beyond it to the next stage of a superhumanity. The passage under consideration today provides a concise view of this evolution out of inconscience and puts it into the perspective of the ultimate divine reality which supports, upholds, and leads it. For to Sri Aurobindo, evolution is not a fortuitous accident or random unfolding of unconscious mechanisms, but a willed, guided, and flawlessly organized process of the supreme divine being in the form of an individualized soul, gradually awakening through eons of time out of an apparent swoon or dive into inconscience. The passage depicts Savitri having a vision of this process of evolution during a sleepless night in which she enters into a trance, seeking to consciously unite with her soul to overcome her adverse fate. The passage begins on page 477 and extends to page 479. A dream disclosed to her the cosmic past, the cryptseed and the mystic origins, the shadowy beginnings of world fate. A lamp of symbol lighting hidden truth, imaged to her the world's significance. In the indeterminate formlessness of self, creation took its first mysterious steps. It made the body shape a house of soul, and matter learned to think, and person grew. She saw space peopled with the seeds of life, and saw the human creature born in time. At first appeared a dim, half-neutral tide of being emerging out of infinite naught. A consciousness looked at the inconscient vast, and pleasure and pain stirred in the insensible void. All was the deed of a blind world energy. Unconscious of her own exploits, she worked, shaping a universe out of the inane. The first sentence introduces the passage, indicating that this vision of spiritual evolution comes as a dream to Savitri, and that it revealed the shadowy beginnings of world fate, and that this dream was a symbolic image of the hidden truth of the world's significance and meaning. The second sentence gives in 6 lines a brief summary of the evolution leading up to mankind. It begins in the indeterminate formlessness of self, and then made the body shape a house of soul. We see 2 fundamental aspects of the creation, the soul and the body's shape, which we may take as matter and form more generally, but also in the specific sense of the physical body. The soul, we might presume, is related to the formlessness of self, but it now resides in a body or in many bodies. And then in a brief line is concisely described the whole process leading up to man. And matter learned to think, and person grew. The next sentence describes mankind taking form from the seeds of life in space and time. She saw space peopled with the seeds of life and saw the human creature born in time. After this overview, the passage focuses in on the origin of the creation. We see being emerging out of infinite naught, that is, out of nothingness. And then consciousness looked at the inconscient vast. Again, there is a bifurcation of existence, being and non-being, consciousness looking at inconscience. These dualities appear fundamental, beginningless and endless, though they may yet be opposite sides of the same one reality. The following quote from the Life Divine gives us an insight into them. He says, "We give the name of non-being to a contrary affirmation of the unknowable's freedom from all cosmic existence. Freedom, that is to say, from all positive terms of actual existence, which consciousness in the universe can formulate to itself, even from the most abstract, even from the most transcendent." But here there is an emergence of being and consciousness out of non-being or naught. Sri Aurobindo describes this process in his explanation of his teaching, writing of himself in the third person. He says, "The teaching of Sri Aurobindo states that this one being and consciousness is involved here in matter. Evolution is the method by which it liberates itself. Consciousness appears in what seems to be inconscient, and once having appeared, is self-impelled to grow higher and higher, and at the same time to enlarge and develop towards a greater and greater perfection." What is key here is the phrase, "consciousness is involved in matter." Involved means it is there, but hidden, as if in seed form. There is a prior involution, a reverse of the process of evolution, in which the fully aware, infinite consciousness of the divine being becomes inconscient. It becomes hidden in the workings and movements of its force and action. But it nevertheless guides the workings. In the gradual emergence of consciousness, which we call evolution, nature's force seems at first to operate inconsciently through mechanical material processes to release the consciousness. But it operates guided by a supreme intelligence. Even though involved, consciousness still guides the process, both from within and from above the manifestation. Evolution is not a random, fortuitous accident. The passage continues. "In fragmentary beings she grew aware, a chaos of little sensibilities, gathered round a small ego's pinpoint head. In it, a sentient creature found its poise. It moved and lived a breathing, thinking whole. On a dim ocean of subconscient life, a formless surface consciousness awoke. A stream of thoughts and feelings came and went. A foam of memories hardened and became a bright crust of habitual sense and thought, a seat of living personality, and recurrent habits mimicked permanence. Mind nascent labored out a mutable form. It built a mobile house on shifting sands, a floating isle upon a bottomless sea. This part of the passage describes the evolution emerging from matter into subconscious life and then into conscious and mentalized life. The use of the pronoun she in the first line is interesting. In the earlier part of the passage that we read, it was used first to describe Savitri and then suddenly shifted in the last sentence to refer to nature more broadly, which was described as a blind world energy. This subtle shift suggests that Savitri is identifying with nature, and it is due to this identification that she is witnessing this symbolic representation of the evolution in her dream. In the first line here, in fragmentary beings she grew aware. She could be interpreted either way, as either the individual Savitri or nature, but either way it is describing life becoming self-aware in individual beings. This first sentence describes an organization of separated, chaotic sensibilities around a center of ego, a sense of self, though this self is small like a pinhead. We can think of the various sensations we might feel in the various parts of our bodies, and the various sights, sounds, smells, tastes that our senses receive from the world around us, all becoming organized into the perception of a single being, moving through the rich, diversified world. Our mind is capable of focusing on a particular sensation, for example, of the smell of the air, or the sound of a bird, or of the leaves of a tree rustling in the breeze. Each sensation is unique and separate, but they become blended into a vague backdrop to our own sense of self, or perhaps to the particular task we have at hand. This sense of self, of ego, is always shifting, now on a particular thought, next on some memory, next on a sound or sight that grabs our attention, next on some sensation or discomfort in our body, next on some task requiring our body to carry out some movement. And all the while constantly receiving feedback from the environment, constantly reacting and adjusting to it. Our ego is in a state of constant rustle and stir. Sri Aurobindo, in one of his letters, gives an interesting image of the ego, which we perceive as the driver of our life. He describes it as a meddlesome fly on the wheel. We think of it as doing the driving, but it is simply being moved along with the turns and twists of nature. The second sentence presents a fascinating psychological analysis of our being. It describes the awakening of consciousness on a dim ocean of subconscious life. The word on rather than out of is apt because this subconscious dim ocean remains below the surface of the conscious stream of thoughts and feelings, of which we have become aware and which constantly come and go. They are like little currents or waves on the surface of a vast and deep ocean. And then we have this beautiful image carrying forward the metaphor. A foam of memories hardened and became a bright crust of habitual sense and thought. The recurrences of particular sensations, feelings, and thoughts held in memory turn into habits and build a sense of coherent personality and permanence. This may apply especially to the evolutionary stage of animals, whose minds are still enveloped in the recurrent movements of life and have yet to develop a clear and strong sense of independent will and purpose. But it can also be applied to the human ego, for the human mind and will are also overpowered by the habitual movements of subconscious instincts and desires. Put starkly, what we call ourselves, our ego, is just a habit, a habitual way of being. Of course, habits can be broken or changed, either by circumstances or by choice, and this change is often difficult or painful. The final sentence carries the description of the evolutionary emergence of consciousness to the level of mind nascent, that is, mind emerging in its formative stage, which perhaps applies to most of humanity, in which a clear and strong intellect having mastery over life is yet to be developed. As mind develops, it carries further the construction of a stable sense of self, a mental ego. The human being has a more complex sense of self, not only a coalescence of recurrent thoughts and feelings and behaviors, but of particular interests, aims, endeavors, projects, hopes, and ideals. Nevertheless, all this too is impermanent and floats upon a bottomless sea of consciousness with deep subconscious depths. And it also has vast interior conscious regions of which we are unaware on our floating isle of ego, and higher divine regions above our minds, all of which influence our temporary drift of life and may alter or expand or cut it off at any moment. The passage continues. A conscious being was by this labor made. It looked around it on its difficult field, in the green, wonderful, and perilous earth. It hoped in a brief body to survive, relying on matter's false eternity. It felt a Godhead in its fragile house. It saw blue heavens, dreamed immortality. A conscious soul in the inconscience world, hidden behind our thoughts and hopes and dreams. An indifferent master signing nature's acts leaves the vicegerent mind a seeming king. In his floating house upon the sea of time, the regent sits at work and never rests. He is a puppet of the dance of time. He is driven by the hours. The moment's call compels him with the thronging of life's need and the babble of the voices of the world. This mind no silence knows, nor dreamless sleep. In the incessant circling of its steps, thoughts tread forever through the listening brain. It toils like a machine and cannot stop. Here, Sri Aurobindo describes our human consciousness. It has been formed through the process he has described, forming out of the subconscious ocean, a coalescence of recurrent thoughts and feelings moving on the surface of this sea of consciousness, forming into an individualized, hardened sense of self, of a conscious being looking out on the wonderful and dangerous world around it. This ego existence, this habitual pattern of thoughts, feelings, and sensations is fragile and transient, but it hopes to survive and builds defenses to last and strives to grow strong. There comes next a sudden shift, the appearance of a soul. It felt the Godhead in its fragile house. It saw blue heavens, dreamed immortality. This presents the appearance of the soul from the standpoint of the egoistic consciousness on the surface, that it senses something greater within supporting it, and it sees higher possibilities of a wider conscious existence that is immortal and not subject to the limitations it presently experiences. This shift transitions further in the next sentence to the standpoint of the immortal soul within. We see that it is hidden behind our thoughts and hopes and dreams. It is next described as an indifferent master signing nature's acts. This suggests that whereas the soul is master of nature, it is allowing nature to act as it pleases. It is sanctioning nature's actions. And then it says, it leaves the vicegerent mind a seeming king. Vicegerent is another word for vice-regent, a deputy king, someone standing in for the king. This suggests that the soul, hidden behind the mind's thoughts and hopes and dreams, is allowing its deputy, the vicegerent mind, to act in its place as king and ruler over the nature. The next sentence reverts back to the view of the mind, sitting in his floating house, constantly at work, driven by time, by the urgent needs and calls coming at every moment, and by the ceaseless voices of the world. Earlier, we noted a subtle shift in the significance of the pronoun she, which was first referring to Savitri and later to nature, a blind world energy. Afterwards, when referring to the ego's pinpoint head and mind nascent, Sri Aurobindo used the pronoun it. But now, with the arrival of the vicegerent mind, the pronoun shifts to he. He is a puppet of the dance of time. He is driven by the hours. This mind knows no rest. It hardly ever falls silent, even in sleep. Thoughts continue sounding in the mind like a machine that never stops. It is a rather stinging indictment of the mind, cutting criticism. It should perhaps be contextualized. There are, in fact, many levels of mind which Sri Aurobindo describes in Savitri, And here he is referring especially to the lowest part of the mind, which he calls the physical mind. The different levels of mind may be broadly grouped into the physical, vital, and truly mental or intellectual levels. And even within these, there are finer gradations. The physical mind is generally focused on the physical world, on practical things. Its knowledge is limited and depends mainly on the physical senses as well as habitual ideas. And it tends to misunderstand and interpret things according to its own notions. The vital mind is concerned primarily with satisfying vital desires, sometimes in a very clever way. The intellectual mind is concerned with ideas themselves, with representing the world and the truth in ideas which correspond with or reflect the reality more or less accurately. Naturally, all of these levels operate to some extent, more or less, in all human beings. One part taking the lead at one moment, another part dominating the next. Often the lower levels distort the proper operation of the intellectual mind. There are also higher levels of mind above the intellect, sometimes operating in our intuitions, but rarely are we aware of their action. When the mind becomes very quiet or silent, we may receive insights from these higher levels. Otherwise, they typically become distorted in their transit through the lower levels of mind. The passage continues. Into the body's many-storied rooms, endless crowd down the dream god's messages. All is 100-toned murmur and babble and stir. There is a tireless running to and fro, a haste of movement and a ceaseless cry. The hurried servant senses answer apace to every knock upon the outer doors. Bring in time's visitors, report each call, admit the 1,000 queries and the calls, and the messages of communicating minds, and the heavy business of unnumbered lives, and all the 1,000-fold commerce of the world. Even in the tracks of sleep is scant repose. He mocks life's steps in strange subconscient dreams. He strays in a subtle realm of symboled scenes. His night with thin air visions and dim forms, he packs or peoples with slight drifting shapes, and only a moment spends in silent self. Here, Sri Aurobindo elaborates on the ceaseless stir of the human mind. In the first line, he alludes to the many levels of consciousness housed in the human being, the body's many-storied rooms. Many-storied suggests a hierarchy of levels. And we've already mentioned the three main levels of mind and their finer gradations. But in addition to these various levels of mind, there are also various levels of the vital consciousness and various levels of the physical consciousness, which make up these many-storied rooms. The vital consciousness also has its physical, vital, and mental gradations, or as it is sometimes described, there is a lower vital, a middle vital, and a higher vital. The lower vital is dominated by desires of the body, such as food, sex, small likings and dislikings, little wishes and desires of all kinds. The middle vital is associated with desires for power, ambition, fame, influence over others, and attractions and repulsions of all kinds. The higher vital includes the emotions, such as love, joy, sorrow, hatred, as well as a mental vital part which gives mental expression to the emotions and the desires of the vital nature. Sri Aurobindo also explains that the material body also has an obscure consciousness of its own, associated with the various parts of the body, the limbs, cells, tissues, glands, and organs, and that it is an aim of the yoga to make this obscure consciousness luminous and directly instrumental to the higher planes and to the divine movement. He explains that there is also a vital physical part of the nature, which is the vehicle of the nervous responses of our physical nature. It is the field and instrument of the smaller sensations, desires, reactions of all kinds, to the impacts of the outer physical and gross material life. And he adds that its habitual reactions and obstinate pettinesses are the chief stumbling block in the way of the transformation of the outer consciousness by the yoga. The character of another part of the physical, the mental physical, is to go on repeating without use the movement that has happened, what we call the mechanical mind. However, if developed, this part is also involved in physical skills, that intelligent action and memory of the body that is evident, for example, in balance and gymnastics. It is into this mixture of varying levels and types of consciousness of the human being that the higher mental and spiritual levels of consciousness descend and work to organize and illumine and transform. This mixture of consciousness is the hundred-toned murmur and babble and stir mentioned in the second sentence. When we think of the difficulties of yoga or of spiritual life, we can imagine this confused amalgam of ignorant and obscure movements into which the higher consciousness is descending and working within us. Naturally, the higher influences are deflected, distorted, and darkened when they enter into this teeming obscurity. Our ego, our sense of self, our limited mentality and will are not to blame. They are just part of the mix of obscurity that is gradually becoming enlightened by the descent of the higher consciousness. But they can support and speed the process, or they can resist and prolong it. The third sentence refers to the crucial role of the hurried servant senses, which answer to every knock upon the outer doors. The adjective servant here is interesting. The role of the senses is certainly to serve the individual, most importantly the mind, to bring it information about the outer world as well as the physical condition of the individual itself, to assist in its decision-making. But as described in the sentence, the senses tend to answer to every knock upon the outer doors. Their role is to be aware, to transmit their perceptions to the individual, but it should be the mind which decides when to answer and when to keep the door shut. Their role is to alert the being to dangers as well as to opportunities. But if they act on their own accord, and open to every knock, or even seek out their own pleasurable sensations, then they are no longer servants, but usurpers of the mind and soul, the regent and the king. There is a revealing translation of a sloka from the Gita in Sri Aurobindo's Essays on the Gita about the proper relation of the senses to the true self. He says, "Supreme, they say, beyond their objects are the senses. Supreme over the senses, the mind. Supreme over the mind, the intelligent will. That which is supreme over the intelligent will is he, is the conscious self, the Purusha." In his revealing commentary, Sri Aurobindo further explains, "The first movement must be obviously to get rid of desire, which is the whole root of the evil and suffering. And in order to get rid of desire, we must put an end to the cause of desire, the rushing out of the senses to seize and enjoy their objects. We must draw them back when they are inclined thus to rush out, draw them away from their objects, as the tortoise draws in his limbs into the shell, so these into their source, quiescent in the mind quiescent in intelligence, the intelligence quiescent in the soul and its self-knowledge, observing the action of nature, but not subject to it, not desiring anything that the objective life can give." In fact, Sri Aurobindo suggests that the intelligent will is the crucial pivot. It can turn us towards the senses and their objects, or it can turn us inward towards a settled peace and equality in the calm and immutable purity of the conscious, silent soul, no longer subject to the distractions of nature. These are from Essays on the Gita, page 98. The next sentence in the passage is an interesting observation on sleep. We normally think of sleep as an indrawn condition in which the mind and body are at rest. Sri Aurobindo makes clear that often it does not give rest or quietude to the mind, and that typically, he says, only for about 10 minutes during the entire night does the mind enter into the silence of the self. Normally, the mind strays into various inner regions of consciousness, typically obscure regions of the subconscious and vital consciousness, which may reproduce symbolic scenes and images and events corresponding to the outer waking consciousness. Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have given important insights and advice regarding sleep and dreams, which may dramatically alter our usual experience of sleep and provide not only greater rest, but also spiritual progress. One of the most significant of these insights comes in the following passage from the Mother. She says, "There is no end to the discoveries that you can make in dreams. But one thing is very important, never to go to sleep when you are very tired. For if you do, you fall into a sort of unconsciousness, and dreams do with you whatever they like, without your being able to exercise the least control. Just as you should always rest before eating, I would advise you all to rest before going to sleep. But then you must know how to rest. There are many ways of doing it. Here is one. First of all, put your body at ease, comfortably stretched out on a bed or in an easy chair. Then try to relax your nerves all together or one by one till you have obtained complete relaxation. This done, and while your body lies limp like a rag on the bed, make your brain silent and immobile till it is no longer conscious of itself. Then slowly, imperceptibly pass from this state into sleep. When you wake up the next morning, you will be full of energy. On the contrary, if you go to bed completely tired and without relaxing yourself, you will fall into a heavy, dull, and unconscious sleep in which the vital will lose all its energies. It is possible that you may not obtain an immediate result, but persevere. Sri Aurobindo and the Mother assert that in the course of yoga we must learn to become conscious during sleep. For example, there is this quote from Sri Aurobindo: "Sleep cannot be replaced, but it can be changed, for you can become conscious in sleep. If you are thus conscious, then the night can be utilized for a higher working, provided the body gets its due rest, for the object of sleep is the body's rest and the renewal of the vital physical force." And he gives this advice for becoming conscious during sleep. At night, you have to pass into sleep in the concentration. You must be able to concentrate with the eyes closed, lying down, and the concentration must deepen into sleep. That is to say, sleep must become a concentrated going inside, away from the outer waking state. He also adds this suggestion: you can pray or will before sleeping to be conscious in sleep. And you can get your waking mind full of the Mother. That is the best way. But you must not expect to be able to succeed all at once. First, the sleep mind must become conscious of what it is doing in sleep. Only afterwards can you determine what it is to do there. And his advice upon waking is this: you need not meditate at once after waking in the morning, but for a few minutes take a concentrated attitude, calling the Mother's presence for the day. If we can follow these simple advices, we can establish a greater control over our spiritual lives. If we become conscious during our sleep, we may begin to have experiences like the following, described in the next part of the passage. Adventuring into infinite mind space, he unfolds his wings of thought in inner air, or traveling in imagination's car, crosses the globe, journeys beneath the stars, to subtle worlds takes his ethereal course, visits the gods on life's miraculous peaks, communicates with heaven, tampers with hell. This is the little surface of man's life. He is this, and he is all the universe. He scales the unseen. His depths dare the abyss. A whole mysterious world is locked within. We enter into the inner realms of consciousness during sleep, but we can also do so in other ways. In thought and inner contemplation and imagination, we can also explore and experience something of the realms of the inner mind. Thinkers, writers, inventors, artists, poets, musicians, all learn the skill of turning within and opening themselves to the subtle inspirations that come from these realms. They become attuned to particular regions and receptive and responsive to their vibrations, ideas, visions, and sounds. The yogi who sits in deep meditation can enter into trance and consciously enter and move in occult worlds, or ascend to regions of spiritual peace and light and delight, in which there is complete contentment and fulfillment. In the higher occult worlds, they may see and converse with gods or other spiritual beings, gain knowledge and power, which can be brought down and remain in their outer being and consciousness. These are things that many human beings have achieved in their spiritual evolution and which can open in those who can undergo the necessary discipline and concentration of their consciousness on these higher possibilities of life. I have chosen the title for the talk from the last line of this segment of the passage. A whole mysterious world is locked within. In part because it is striking, but also because it is a profound statement regarding the evolution which Sri Aurobindo has been describing. Up until now, he has been describing the evolutionary journey of the soul out of the inconscient through the beginnings of life and the development of mind in mankind. And in this part of the passage, he takes the evolution further into an exploration of the inner realms of consciousness, into the adventure of infinite mind space, and into the subtle worlds. In these inner realms, we can visit the gods and communicate with heaven, and we can tamper with hell. In this description, he is no longer speaking of Savitri or of nature, but of mankind. For he says, "This is the little surface of man's life. He is this, and he is all the universe. He scales the unseen, his depths dare the abyss." When he says, "This is the little surface of man's life," this seems to refer to our usual experience of life, not our visits with the gods or communications with heaven or hell. These latter things may be within mankind's experience and they may affect our surface life, but they are inner experiences and not surface ones. But it suggests that a much wider range of subtle worlds lies hidden within us. These inner worlds, ranging from the abyss to the unseen above, are parallels to our soul's evolutionary journey. Our evolution also started out from the abyss, and its culmination lies in the unseen above. Our evolutionary journey has been assisted and shaped by these inner subtle worlds with which we are in communication. It suggests that the entire evolutionary journey from the inconscient depths up to the gods, which Sri Aurobindo has described in this entire passage, its past and its future, is within each of us and is accessible to our conscious experience. A whole mysterious world is locked within. And then the passage concludes. Unknown to himself, he lives a hidden king behind rich tapestries in great secret rooms, an epicure of the spirit's unseen joys. He lives on the sweet honey of solitude, a nameless God in an unapproachable fane, in the secret aditam of his inmost soul. He guards the being's covered mysteries beneath the threshold, behind shadowy gates, or shut in vast cellars of inconscient sleep. The immaculate, divine, all-wonderful casts into the argent purity of his soul his splendor and his greatness and the light of self-creation in time's infinity, as into a sublimely mirroring glass. Man in the world's life works out the dreams of God. The final part of the passage describes the soul, or perhaps the psychic being, the soul personality, which develops in the course of evolution around the soul. Sri Aurobindo describes this being as a hidden king who is unknown to himself. This seems to suggest that this soul or soul personality is like a king or master of the evolution in time, but it is unknown to the outer being which is evolving on the surface of the consciousness. Sri Aurobindo and the Mother assert as a primary aim of the yoga to become conscious of our soul and psychic being, and that this usually requires a long self-discipline of sadhana to achieve. They speak of the psychic being as being situated deep within, behind the heart center, and here it is imaged as being behind rich tapestries in great secret rooms. The image corresponds with that of a king. The next lines are interesting and correspond with Sri Aurobindo's correlation of the psychic being with Ananda. He says the psychic being is an epicure of the spirit's unseen joys. He lives on the sweet honey of solitude. An epicure is one who cultivates a refined taste, for example, for wine or the taste of food. Here it suggests that our inner soul takes an unseen joy in life, even with all its ups and downs, its delights and sufferings. That it lives on the sweet honey of solitude perhaps suggests that it takes its delight in its unity with the divine being. Centered in that identification, it is not swept away by the fluctuations and vicissitudes of the outer consciousness. The following lines from Sri Aurobindo's essay, The Riddle of This World, shed some light on this. He says, "It is the divine that is in us, upholding itself the burden of the fall and its dark consequence. If above it stands forever in its perfect light, bliss, and peace, it is also here. Its bliss, its light, bliss, and peace are secretly here, supporting all. In ourselves there is a spirit a central presence greater than the series of surface personalities which, like the supreme divine itself, is not overborne by the fate they endure. If we find out this divine within us, if we know ourselves as this spirit, which is of one essence and being with the divine, that is our gate of deliverance. And in it, we can remain ourselves even in the midst of this world's disharmonies, luminous, blissful, and free. That much is the age-old testimony of spiritual experience. The Riddle of This World, that essay, is in volume 28 of Sri Aurobindo's Complete Works, page 256, 257, this passage. The next lines allude to the sacred depths of this presence within us, far from the ordinary thoughts and feelings and turmoils of the outer consciousness. He describes it as located in an unapproachable fane, a difficult-to-reach temple or sanctuary, in the secret aditam of his inmost soul. Aditam means the innermost sanctuary of a temple that is open only to the priests. It is here, deep within us, that the mysteries of being are hidden beneath the threshold of our ordinary consciousness. The last two sentences reveal the meaning and significance of our existence, as well as, in a sense, its general process. The Supreme Divine, whom Sri Aurobindo describes as the immaculate, divine, all-wonderful, casts into the soul, our individual souls, his splendor and his greatness and the light of self-creation in time's infinity as into a sublimely mirroring glass. Our souls reflect the Supreme Divine in his self-creation in time's infinity. He expresses himself, unfolds himself in the eternity of time. Our soul's evolution is the divine's self-creation in time, starting from an infinite naught and leading to the unseen divine above our human mind. The last line summarizes the process and its deep significance. Man in the world's life works out the dreams of God. This surface life is a dream of God, but not an unreal dream. It is his self-creation in time's infinity. The divine is gradually revealing himself in the soul's long, winding journey on this green, wonderful, and perilous earth, while taking joy in that progressive revelation. Thanks to Sri Aurobindo.